So in terms of expectations, at this point, I think we need to throw some expectations for quality into our work. So here's a basic rubric for what the expectations are for annotations. If you look at the bullet points, annotations are consistent throughout the text. It's clear you've read through to the end. You have annotated for the purpose, to comprehend, the prompt, which is what is the author trying to reveal about our own world in creating this dystopia, and the specific characteristics of dystopian societies and protagonists. And in the margins, those characteristics are specific and labeled. So you don't just write society in the margin. You would say conforms to expectations or something like that. And that you answer the questions in the text boxes throughout the story. And in terms of point totals, meeting the expectations would be 3 points, progressing toward expectations 2 points, needing improvement 1 point, and non-existent would be 0 points. So I'm going to walk you through some examples that I actually pulled from students so you can kind of see. So the first one, this is my favorite. What do you think this would get? If you had to guess, if you had to put money on it, how many points would this person's annotations get? If you said 0 out of 3, you're correct. They didn't do anything. They just submitted a blank document. You can't trick me, kids. All right. So the next one, here we have an example of someone. It's clear that this person has actually done the reading because they answered the questions in the text boxes and they answered accurately. Otherwise, there's no indication of reading or interacting with the text with an eye toward the dystopian characteristics and the prompt. And so for this one, I'm going to give him some credit because the text boxes indicate some effort, right? So this person would get a 1 out of 3. I think you're probably going to start seeing the pattern here, right? Now, looking at this example, so this person has done some, they've highlighted actually some good passages. These are, some of the same passages that I also annotated, and they have answer questions in the text boxes. So we're seeing some more effort, but what I don't see are any notes in the margin to kind of indicate why, for example, they annotated that particular passage right there or that one. So this one would get a 2 out of 3. Not terrible, right? It's the passages that they chose aren't random. They're good, right? So they should get credit for that. But I'm going to show you the example. Okay, so this is another thing that I commonly see are those of you who like to color code. So that's good to color code. So, this light blue up here is the dystopian characteristics, the purple protagonist, the kind of yellowy color would be for the prompt. However, there's still no notes, nothing specific. I know that this one here has to do with the prompt, but I don't really know what this person was thinking. So again, this person would get a 2 out of 3, provided that the annotations become consistent. And just so everybody knows, they were fairly consistent in this person's example, which is why they're a 2 out of 3 and not a 1 out of 3. And so the last one is, so, there's a little overachieving going on here in the sense that it's both annotated and color-coded. You don't need necessarily to color code if you are doing strong annotations, but you can see, right, breaking rules. That's a great annotation because that is characteristic of a dystopian protagonist. And this question over here, walking at this time is restricted. That's a really good question because it's a question that speaks to dystopian societies. And this is as it continues, right? So this, I think, it's pretty obvious, right? This person would clearly get a 3 out of 3. I do want to point out, however, you don't have to color code. If you're annotating with this many notes, that's fine. You don't also need to color code. Rebellious. Hey, that sounds like something from my notes. Is the character doing something illegal, right, against the rules? Limited freedom. Whoops. So with this new kind of expectation in mind, so here's our expectation. I am going to give you the opportunity to resubmit your annotated copy of The Pedestrian. If you look at what you've submitted and it's good, it's, looks something like this one, then you're good. You don't have to do anything. If, however, it looks like this or like this, right? There's some bolstering you can do. There's some notes you can make in the margins to improve what you've already done. Now, if you're here or here, you're practically starting from scratch. But I want to give you time to do that because moving forward, we'll have more graded work in this unit. And I want to make sure that everybody understands what the expectations are. The first thing I want to do is just point out the annotation instructions up here, right? So what you're going to be annotating for, not just with the pedestrian, but other stories as well. Obviously, anything that helps you better understand, that's our purpose. But I want you to look for specific characteristics of dystopian societies and settings and specific characteristics of dystopian protagonists. And of course, the prompt, which is, what is the author trying to reveal about our actual world, the real world, in creating this dystopia. So the first thing I want to point out is this is what we need to have, this is what we need to have with us as we read, right? So here we have our notes. And it's really this second page here that are going to give us the characteristics. These here are all of our characteristics of dystopian societies. And then this, right, that section, that's our characteristics of dystopian protagonists. And then, of course, the annotation instructions are on the bottom. So, having our notes handy, and in fact, you could conceivably do like a split screen, right, if you want to. Although it might make annotating a little harder to do. But what I did, just to kind of show you, is, there we go. What I did here was I sort of highlighted to kind of show you. So a couple of things that I've noticed in sort of spot checking some of your annotated stories is we still have people who simply highlight and do nothing else. That's not annotating, right? That's just underlining or highlighting, which is what you see I've done here, right? Now, I've had some really good passages highlighted, but this is not annotation. Annotation is when I make notes in the margin to reflect all of these instructions up here. So with that in mind, I'm going to kind of walk through some of it so that you can kind of see what the expectations are. In the beginning, before I really know that it's a dystopia, right? I don't know yet. I'm starting to get a sense of things. So I just want to highlight things that kind of jump out at me in terms of my understanding the story. So what I see at the top here where it says, Leonard Mead, walking was what he most dearly loved to do, and that he was alone or as good as alone in 2053. And it says he would see the cottages and homes with their dark windows, and it was not unequal to walking through a graveyard. Sudden gray phantoms seemed to manifest upon inner room walls, right? So I'm starting to get an impression now of the setting and of Leonard Mead. So the first thing I'm probably going to want to note is this takes place in the future. Now, that's not a characteristic of a dystopia, but it's important for me to understand that this is a world he's creating that doesn't currently exist, but could exist in the future. And additionally, I just note that it's really deserted. Whoops. Deserted. Please forgive, by the way, my terrible handwriting. I don't tend to use my iPad the way you guys do. You're much better at it than I am. And here, well, again, I don't know yet that this is a characteristic of a dystopia, but I do come to the conclusion when I read this section here where it says, and on his way he would see the cottages and homes with their dark windows, and it was not unequal to walking through a graveyard where only the faintest glimmers of firefly light appeared in flickers behind the windows. Sudden gray phantoms seemed to manifest upon inner room walls where a curtain was still undrawn against the night, and then even like whisperings and murmurs there. And the conclusion that I'm going to draw here is that they're all watching TV. Now, obviously, we've all read the story at this point, so we understand that the fact that they are all watching TV is what makes this a dystopia. But when I'm reading the story the first time, I don't necessarily know that, but I do know that he's out walking at night while while the other houses seem to be occupied by people watching television, right? So now I'm going to say what conclusions I don't know much about him at this point, but I can draw a few conclusions, right? The first conclusion I can draw is that he likes to walk. In fact, he loves, I'm going to write loves to walk. We learned that in the first paragraph. It's what Mr. Leonard Mead most dearly loved to do. He's a loner. He seems to be on his own. Now, some people wrote that he was lonely, but you get the impression as you read that he's actually perfectly happy doing what he is doing, right? And the other thing, he seems to be very observant. He notes what's going on. And this is confirmed later, as he's picking up leaves and kind of taking in the sights and the smells and the sounds of the evening. These are my initial impressions. Oops. So this is an interesting passage, right, where it says, for long ago he had wisely changed to sneakers when strolling at night because the dogs in intermittent squads would parallel his journey with barkings if he wore hard heels, and lights might click on and faces appear, and an entire street be startled by the passing of a lone figure himself in the early November evening. So if he switched from hard clicking shoes to sneakers because people would notice him otherwise, that tells me that he doesn't want to be noticed. He doesn't want to be noticed. Sorry. Right? So that's interesting. That's an interesting thing to learn about him. And it's already starting to seem like he's different, right? He's different from other people. So we get that a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? In a more obvious way. I'm going to do that a lot. Where as he's walking by, he's kind of quietly talking to people, but not really talking to them. And he says, hello in there, he whispered to every house on every side as he moved. What's up tonight on Channel 4, Channel 7, Channel 9? Where are the cowboys rushing? And do I see the United States cavalry over the next hill to the rescue? He seems to be sort of questioning. I mean, he's literally asking questions, but it seems that he questions the society's norms, which is being inside watching television. And that tells us that he believes that this norm of sitting at home and watching TV is a problem, and this is where I really start to see the characteristics of a dystopian protagonist, right? So if I come over to my notes, and here are my notes for dystopian protagonists, he becomes, being rebellious or believes something is wrong with society or questions the existing social and political systems, right? So he seems to be questioning, and he seems to think that the way everybody else is wrong, right? So that right away I'm starting to see elements of a dystopian protagonist in our friend Leonard Mead. So moving on, another section, by the way, I'm not going to fill in all the boxes. I'm doing this to kind of show you what my expectations are, but I'm not going to do the entire story because I think that would maybe take too long. So with that, sorry. One of the things that I noticed about this section, about the sidewalk and about how he's never seen anybody in all of his years of walking, he's different, right? So two things. I noticed something about the setting here, but I also noticed something about Leonard Mead himself, right? So if no one is outside walking and everybody is inside their houses watching television, they're all kind of conforming. So people are conforming. Now notice I'm not writing a big long note in the margin. I'm simply writing the word conform. That just serves as a reminder to me. But Leonard Mead does not conform, right? He's kind of rebelling against what's expected of him, which we know because he's the only person. For thousands of miles, 10 years, he's never run into another person. Another thing I thought was interesting was this section here where it says, during the day it was a thunderous surge of cars, and then toward the bottom of the paragraph, but now these highways too were like streams in a dry season. So what that tells me is during the day, it's super busy. But at night, no one's out. So that tells me something about the setting, right? Everybody is doing the same thing. They all conform to certain expectations. And up here, where I've done this thing about the police, which was part of your quiz question, there's only one police car, right? Which is an interesting thing to think about, a world in which there's little to no crime. But believe it or not, as much as that sounds great to have no crime, we have to think about what the reason is. The reason there's no crime is because everyone's inside. They're all watching TV instead of interacting with the world, right? So the upside, no crime. The downside, they're all, a bunch of zombies, which, as you look at this section here, everything went on in the tomb-like houses at night now, he thought, continuing his fancy. The tombs, ill-lit by television light, where people sat like the dead, the gray or multicolored lights touching their faces but never really touching them. This is probably the best passage to illustrate that people are dehumanized, right? He's basically calling them dead or zombies, right? They lack human qualities, they lack human connection, and that's dystopian, right? So I'm going to note that over here. Dehumanized. Because they're basically zombies, which is different than what we would consider human. So I'm not going to go through the entire story, but basically I just want to show you that if you'll notice, now I haven't gone through the whole story, but I have a note for basically every single thing that I have highlighted, right? That's annotating. That is the expectation. So moving forward, what I expect of you is this quality and this level of interaction with the text. And obviously, you have to have your notes. Oops, I might do that 8 million times. You have to have your notes. These are all really important. This is what we're looking for. So you can have that as a split screen if you need to, whatever works best for you. And the other thing to point out is that it's these annotations that are going to allow you to do a good job on the post-reading questions, which really do relate to the annotations because they relate to the characteristics of dystopias and dystopian protagonists. So that's that for now.